Eric Janis, who was our second speaker, he recommended that we bring people who live this every single day to the symposium. And that's what I have invited Jennifer and Kyle to tell their story. There's nothing more than that, and we will welcome questions at the end of their conversation with us. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Hello, thank you for all of you for being here. I think my story starts off a little strange. I think I'm here because I am very, very lucky. I met a man who is smart and funny and clever and skilled in so many ways and caring and has integrity. But I also fell in love with a man who committed this inconceivable crime. Inconceivable to me, I think unimaginable to him. If you had come, or if his future self had come to him and said he would do this, he would never have believed it. And he is certainly at a place now where he can't even fathom going back there, being there again. But that's not to say that he hasn't taken full responsibility, and he holds himself accountable for his actions. I really do believe that I'm lucky in that, as hard as that path has been. I knew when I met him right away that we were meant to be together. I actually sat across from him at a table, and within 5 minutes I got up and I moved to sit next to him in the booth, and we have been next to each other ever since then. And it's coming up on a decade, coming close to that. He was very upfront and honest with me from the beginning about where he was and what was happening and what he had done. So I'll start by being upfront and honest with you and tell you what was happening in his life. He was in a marriage that, I'll tell you a little secret. The day of the wedding, his mother said to him, "It's not too late, we can all leave now." But he did. He went ahead and forged forward with his best foot forward, because he puts his best into everything. And they had 2 beautiful children. But throughout the marriage, it was very difficult, and they were not a good partnership. 2 very good people, not a good partnership, neither one of them happy. She has back surgery, and she's not recovering well. One of his daughters has an undiagnosed, very problematic illness. They don't know what it is. They're doing all sorts of invasive types of procedures. So she's frightened, and it's scary, and he's very afraid he very well lose his daughter. Other person who might have been a support system in his life, his parents, are traveling overseas, and his mother takes ill in a foreign country, in a foreign hospital where they don't speak the language, and they really believe she's on her deathbed. And like any good Jewish mother, all she could do was insist that her son has to come to her side, and he is guilt-ridden because he's trying to manage all of these other things that are happening. And in the meantime, as I said, he's an Ivy League educated gentleman, and he works in the corporate world, but he is in a toxic environment, and there's a lot of pressure, and it's a lot of hours, and he gets laid off, a surprise layoff, the big boom. And it becomes more than the big boom, because what happens is he turns to the internet for fantasy chatting as his means of coping. And because he has no one available at this point for support for himself, and he has no one to turn to, and we don't have a society that is set up for someone who has this background to try to reach out and find some help. So what happens is he ends up having this one, he's in adult fantasy chat rooms. He has this one particular person he's having a regular chat with, and after a while she says that she is 14. And he doesn't believe her right away, and they go back and forth. about whether or not that's her fantasy, that kind of stuff. And he's thinking, well, he's kind of thinking, who knows what he's thinking, but he's thinking, it doesn't sound like a teenager because of the way the person talks, and the availability, the times this person is available to talk, certainly doesn't match up with the schedule of a teenager. And he even comes to the conclusion that perhaps it might be a police officer, which really, that hits me because I believe the police officer code of honor, or their motto, is to serve and protect. And it turns out that it actually was a police officer. He stopped speaking with them, stopped speaking with what he thought was this woman, and they continued to contact him until he talked to them again, and they made arrangements to meet at a bookstore. So he drove to the bookstore, and he sat in his car in the parking lot well past the meeting time, and then decided that he was going to drive away. But as soon as he started to pull his car away, he was surrounded by police officers, and he was arrested.
Just for clarification, the last communication indicated, or the other person did say they were a teenager?
They did,
Okay.
yeah, they did. And he wasn't sure about that, so there was an indication. She had said that she was 14. So when he tells me this story, and we talk a lot about it in the beginning of our relationship, I'm not hearing a story of a predator or a child molester or someone who's even deviant. I'm hearing addiction, and I'm hearing coping mechanisms. Unfortunately, I come from a family that my father was an alcoholic, and my brother used drugs and alcohol from his very young teenage years. So I'm familiar with the signs of addiction. I'm very familiar with dysfunctional coping mechanisms and that type of thing. And I don't see a predator in this man. I see integrity, and I see a good man. And I decide that I'm going to stick with him. And so it's for him, before we got together, or even in those times, it was very dark days for him. He is fortunate that he is in, not only is he educated, he comes from an upper middle class family. They are now back in the United States, and they are going to back him. He immediately, when he makes bail, is able to contact a doctor that he starts working with immediately. Before he even gets a lawyer, he gets professional help. And he's at the lowest point of his life, but he decides that he really needs to do the work that needs to be done. So he's with the doctor, and he's doing reading, and he's doing research, and he did a lot of writing, actually, and I think that helped a lot as well. And it's a time when he also is trying to lift himself up and carry himself, but he also has to carry his family, because his wife, they're actually now at this point in the process of becoming divorced, is not up to the task. And in many ways, her behaviors are making the situation worse and more difficult for everyone involved. So he was going to their house, and he would take care of the house, and he would take care of the kids. And then when he, after his trial, he was allowed to continue to do that because the judge saw that it was necessary, that he was necessary to be available for his two children, he had two girls. So he is going to the house and making them meals and doing the grocery shopping and doing the laundry and helping them with their homework. And most importantly, he is talking to them, and he is listening to them. And it's a great thing, because most people don't get to do that when in this type of situation. But he goes one day, and the dog comes out of the dog door and comes greeting him. And like we do when we see dogs we love, we say, "Hey, girl. Hey, come on, girl." And unfortunately, there was a neighbor who was across the street, and this is in an affluent neighborhood, so across the street is where Alex is standing back there. And she is 13, and she tells her mom, "Oh, Mr. So-and-so tried to get me to come over. He tried to say, hey, he was saying hello to me." So her mother makes one phone call. One phone call. And Jason is no longer allowed to go to the house, and he has to wear an ankle bracelet to be monitored, and he has a curfew. And he lives in South Windsor, and his daughters live on the other side of what we in this town quaintly call the mountain. They live in Simsbury. So one action by a 13-year-old girl, and the story was never verified. He was never asked what had happened. That's it. His girls end up being alone on this. Of course, he's still there for them, but in a lot of ways, the system failed, and the girls are alone. And they have to go to high school, and they have to face adults who are in a moral panic. And I want to thank the judge for giving me those words, because I use the words fear and hysteria so much. Now I can sometimes say moral panic, and I won't feel like I'm being so redundant. And you would think in a school system they would be better prepared to deal with this and understand and talk about this, and maybe have some idea from what the professor taught us is real and true, and not a myth and not fear. But they're not. The adults in the school are not able to do that, and the kids in the school are not able to do that. The kids in the school are, many friends remain true, but many people harassed the girls, and even sexually harassed the girls. Hey, your dad's a perv, you must be a perv too. And these are just young girls, and they are under a huge amount of strain, and they can't see their dad whenever they want, or when they need to, which is most important. And of course, there's the gossip, because this is a great story. Come here. It's told in smiles, and it's secret, and it's titillating, it's fascinating. It's like that kind of train wreck that you can't look away from. But it's also very isolating, because people are around you, and yet they're not talking to you, they're talking about you. And they don't want you near them, and they are watching you and monitoring you every single minute. I think that putting Jason in the ankle monitor was an easy way out for the system. And I think that it drives the perception that people who commit crimes such as this are monsters or perverts or deviant or abnormal, and that he's a danger. It sent a message that he's a danger. We could be walking somewhere, anywhere. We couldn't be walking somewhere, anywhere, because we weren't allowed to go somewhere, anywhere. So we couldn't be walking in a park or at the mall, but let's just say we were walking down the street. If someone noticed that he had this on his ankle, he suddenly became somebody they had to worry about. He suddenly became someone to be afraid of. He suddenly became a danger. And all they know is that he has a monitor on his ankle. Okay. We are very committed to our faith, and what Jason did is we have a concept called teshuvah, and it's like repentance, and it's It's more than a confession, it's a path or a process. And Jason began teshuva the day that this happened. And I'm sure that he started it while he was actually sitting in the jail cell thinking. But we both are involved in working with our community, and Jason is working toward teshuva, which is repentance and forgiveness and repair. Repair is a big part of it, but also a part of it is that you are doing good and that you are using your skills and your strength to build something and to add to your community. So we have our community of our temple and our congregation, but that also for us and our faith includes the community in which we live. So the town where we're living is very important for us to focus on as well. And we go through 8 years or so. Well, after Jason was done with probation, he then did join the board. But quite recently, or about a year ago, he became president of the board. And the town, we live in South Windsor, had a problem where they did not have enough after-school programs for kids. And there were a lot of two-parent families that worked, because that's the society that we live in. And they were pressuring the town to find a solution. Well, the town couldn't find a solution, and quite frankly, I don't think that they were really all that interested. But we offered up our social hall as a meeting place where people who were involved in this could come together and try to solve the problem. And the YMCA is one of the places that showed up, and they liked our building, and they said, this would work. We could do this. We'll run the program, and we'll rent the building from you. What do you think? And we thought, great, this is even better than we thought. We're really going to be helping our community here. So Jason, who has an MBA in finance and is the president, gets on a committee. So it isn't just Jason, it's a committee of people, are negotiating a rental contract. And people are fighting it, because we're Jewish, so people are complaining, and there's people that don't like it, and he managed, we're not going to make any money, and, the whole thing, and I don't know how he pulls it off, because I just was ready to throw it in, but he stuck with it, and he pulled it all together right under the bell, like right in the nick of time. And then it blew up. And it really blew up. It turns out that Jason's a monster. He is dysfunctional and incurable, and that he will certainly do this again. It turns out that there is someone in our congregation who checks the registry every month also. And that frightens me, and it frightens me in so many ways, but also frightens me for the person who's doing that. You're not okay if you're that afraid that you need to check the registry every month. So we're already 8 years into this. We're looking at the end of the light, and we got 20 months left on the registry, and all of a sudden, we're in the newspaper. And it's never just the name, it's always, so-and-so, registered sex offender, in every single story. And the news is, there's no story. The story is he was negotiating a rental contract. He wasn't going to be anywhere near kids. He has a full-time job. There is just mass hysteria across town, and it is really across town. It's on social media, on all different sorts of community boards. It infects the town council. That next town council meeting actually is a part where they discuss Jason, and one side of the parties completely trash him. And they don't really know him, and the other side of the table actually does know him, and they sit there silently because they are uneducated, and they suddenly are thinking, is he a monster? And these are people that have known Jason for a long time and also knew he was on the registry. Quite a few people in our congregation knew that Jason had committed this offense and that he was on the registry. So it completely falls apart, and it's more than just that it's in the newspaper again, and now we gotta wait till the cycle changes, and it actually makes the national news. It's in a national magazine, and it's more than that. Nobody was served by this. The parents who really needed that aftercare program didn't get it. They didn't get it. They have nowhere to send their kids. His parents have to live through this all over again. His ex-wife has to live through it all over again because she still lives in the state and it's in the newspaper there. And there's just this really wildfire, and nobody steps up and says, hey, wait a minute. This is a person we know. Let's find out what the real truth is. We're a religion that's based on social justice, and justice is truth. Nobody's looking for the truth because everybody is afraid of the stranger. And yet, Jason's not a stranger. Well, we're afraid of the person on the sex registry. Well, why? And I think that that's part of the saddest part is that our community and our temple ended up losing this Ivy League educated, dedicated. I think dedicated is probably the most part. The hardest part is to find somebody to volunteer work is for them to show up all the time and put their 100% into it. And that's what we did. Many churches and religious groups are finding themselves collapsing. We were actually growing, and we were growing under Jason's leadership, and we were growing under his skills and knowledge as a business person. There were people who had outpouring of support for us, but at the same time, they didn't want to stop and talk to us about, can you explain this to me or help me understand it? And why is because any person can go online and check the registry, and they get 2 or 3 sentences about you in a really bad photograph, and they think that they know you. And they think that they know what you're going to do next, and they think that they have the right, or they think that they have the obligation to monitor you, to stifle you, to point you out in a crowd, and yet exclude you from being able to do good. And that's what happened in this situation, is that the registry stopped a person from being able to do good for a lot of people. That's basically our story.
Ready, Kyle?
Yep. Anyways, I'd like to thank Eileen for asking me to speak, and I really appreciate all of you listening to all these speakers, because I realize that this is a topic that is very sensitive to a lot of people. And I've talked to a couple of my friends that, when speaking of crimes, they could forgive all types of crimes except crimes that involve sex offenses. And I realize it's a very sensitive and difficult thing to talk about, and I'm just really grateful that we have this opportunity to do that. I'm here today to talk about someone very close to me who is on the registry, and I'll give you a little background on how we met. I was attending a church, and I was there for around 2 years, and I found out from someone at the church that someone would be coming back, and all I knew is that they were away for a few years, and that's all I heard. And I'm like, okay. And so when he came back, and was introduced and everything, we became very close, and, the rest is history. We've been together ever since. And at first, I had no idea, what exactly he was away for 2 years meant. And so I guess I'd be in the category of, little, uneducated unknowingly in the subject. And I didn't know for probably about a month and a half. And, he was typically, you would look at him, you would never think anyone like that would commit such a crime. His crime was possession of child pornography, and it was on the federal offense. And when I first found out, I have to say it was a little shocking, but at the same time, from the 2 months I knew him since, would have had no idea. Everything was just, we had a great time, a lot of similar interests, especially in music. And so, as part of the probation process, you have to, when you become romantically involved with someone, they have to disclose to you that what their crime was. And so he did, and, I took a moment to, internalize that, and I was just accepting of it, that I realized that, he really was almost just like anyone else, and, just made a mistake. And I don't think, of course, what he did was wrong, and I don't excuse it, but, he went to prison for, I think, little under 2 years, and is on probation for, I believe, 10 years. And I also want to include a little bit about his story about coming out of jail and the support he has had. Upon returning back to Connecticut, he was welcomed back to the church that he grew up at, which, is one of the things that you would think someone like him wouldn't be welcomed back to. But his church family knew that he was not a risk to be around, an institution that had children. And everyone, just about everyone, I think maybe there was one person who, had a little bit of a problem, but, didn't leave over it, was very accepting. And that, really, for me, showed a lot about how they thought of him. And besides the church family, one of the difficult things was finding a place to live. And fortunately, there was a lady at the church who had a house that was a two-family house, and so she knew Stephen for a while and knew that he needed a place to live, and that, with being a registered sex offender, you would have to register on a registry and have your address attached to it. And, out of support for him, agreed. And so we've been living there for about a little over 3 years. And he's also had the support of a lot of his long-term friends. And, after leaving prison, he told me that he is very fortunate for the situation and the support he's had. But he's also told me that if he didn't have that support, he had no idea where he would be. And I realized that, some people who commit crimes like this, don't get as much understanding from family and friends and the community. And a lot of the support he got, and I think that was very, very important in this whole process, was the probation officers he has had. They're federal probation officers, and they, I have to say, were and still are incredible people, very, very supportive. And, you know, the first time I met them, was the first time I actually met a probation officer, and, you know, in my mind, it was more of like, you know, a police officer type person, but they were like completely awesome people that you would just, they really wanted the best for him. And, you know, for 2 years, everything was like, went very, very, very well. And, but the registry is through the state of Connecticut, and he was, this would have been, I believe, 2 years ago. He, every 90 days, you have to verify your address. And, you know, it's different than once a year having to register as a sex offender. And what he would do to guarantee that the letter would get to the state police in Middletown, he would bring it to the post office and, you know, get it certified mail to guarantee it would get. And well, one 3 months period, he was 1 day late. They received it, and they, you know, had it 1 day late, but they also sent him something that said you were a day late, and he was very disturbed and rather panicked because he knew it was a very serious thing. And, you know, so he called his probation officers, and his probation officers, you know, told him, you know, you probably shouldn't worry too much. You know, through their experience, there was a grace period, and, you know, it should be fine. And fast forward 2 years, he was arrested. And, you know, we were like confused because it was, you know, 2 years since that happened. It was because of that letter being 1 day late. And he ended up getting a Class D felony because of it. And even though he was in total compliance, he always was at the same address. He followed his probation to, you know, its strictest finest, and his lawyer was speaking with the state, the prosecutor, and the prosecutor said that if this case would have been thrown out, if this was, you know, a few years ago, and for some reason it 2 years later they prosecuted it, and now he has a Class D felony on his record. And, you know, I understand, you know, you have to be accountable and responsible. You know, deadlines are very important, but, you know, we're all human, and I think, you know, I mean, I've been late accidentally for things, and I just, from that point on, it was like a huge blow to him, and very discouraging, and, you know, because it doesn't make sense, and it didn't make sense. And, you know, he came into because he was doing so well, it kind of brought him into I wouldn't say depression, but like a lack of maybe hopelessness, because he was involved with a gardening group. And, you know, they would plant tons and tons of what do you call them? Colonial gardens, like plants that they grew here like 200 years ago, and he loved it. He was a fantastic gardener, and he was doing that for, I want to say, 8 months, and he was going to be and his probation officers knew about it, and it was, all clear and everything, and he was then asked to, if he was interested in being the president leader of this gardening group, and the place got a new director, and the director invited him for coffee to talk about gardening, and the first thing he said is, "You are not allowed on the property of this place anymore." And it was a terrible blow to him, because he really, really enjoyed doing it, and it gave him a self of, accomplishment, and, nothing of the crime he did had anything to do with, what he was doing there. And there was no children involved, and, through his probation officers, there's, steps that he would follow that, don't be around children if adults are in the room. And, I fully trust, even if he was alone, that he would never do anything. And
When you described his internet use, how can you describe that to the group today?
his internet use of, like, what he does today?
Well, when we were talking about his looking at pornography and the child pornography, you described it a specific way to me when we talked. The obsessive compulsive.
Oh, I asked him, one of the things I really do believe in is second chances, and, you committed a crime and you have a sentence and you're working on being rehabilitated. And I never really wanted to, I knew it was something that he clearly was not really happy about, as I think most people wouldn't be. But I was just, after a while, I asked him, why? Why would you do that? Because it's clearly wrong. And he told me that it was as if he just couldn't control it. It's like a drug, or like a compulsive thing. And it's just, I can't personally, I can't see myself, I would never do that. But I also realized that people come, everyone has their own background and story, and I don't know what led him to the point of doing that. But he had a very, one thing I would, I remember Judge Hoffman saying is that, every case is different, and individualizing, the people. And, some people come from backgrounds that they've endured horrible trauma that could cause, an effect on how you act as an adult. And, every case really is different. And I do believe part of this, his compulsive way of handling things could have definitely be influenced by, his childhood growing up, which I won't get too into, but it was not good at all. And, he got arrested at, I want to say, in his early 20s, 21. And myself, I couldn't imagine being 21, going through that entire thing, knowing that, my whole life ahead of me, that there's so much I couldn't do. And, I truly do believe he is not a risk. And it's one thing I was very, wary about, staying in a relationship with someone. And, it's just very, I want the best for, everybody, and he has wonderful skills in many different areas. He went to school for sociology, and he's a fantastic cook, and there's a lot he can't do, and it's holding him back because of being on the registry. It's close to impossible to, join certain groups and work with certain people. And, if an employer asks you about, your criminal background, and, if he said that, most likely wouldn't get the job. But if he didn't tell them and they found out, they would fire him. And, I think a job is something that's very important for, from what I see, for people being rehabilitated, because I just feel as though it gives structure, and especially if it's a job you're passionate about, it gives you a sense of meaning and, income. And one of the things he told me about was a lot of people in this situation, at a young age become homeless. And, their whole lives, it's very difficult to probably be able to achieve your full potential. And, of course, like I said, what he did was wrong, and I don't consider him a danger, but, ultimately I want what's safe for everyone and what's, in the betterment for people who have committed crimes and to be properly rehabilitated.
This is Dr. Greenfield. I invited him to speak after Jennifer and Kyle because they both spoke about some. I invited David Greenfield, our expert on internet addiction, to talk a little bit and frame the discussion from Jennifer and Kyle around the internet and how it can affect people.
So, I just woke you all up from your post-brownie comatose state, which, by the way, were the best brownies I've ever had. I don't know about you guys. So, yeah, I'm Dr. David Greenfield. I'm a clinical professor of psychiatry at UConn, actually. Go Huskies. And also, I run a clinic in West Hartford called the Center for Internet and Technology Addiction, and have been treating internet addiction for well over 20 years. I'm also on the board of CATSO, so I deal with a lot of forensic cases around internet use and abuse, and unfortunately have seen both of these cases and circumstances dozens of times in my work. And one of the things I want to say about it is, and obviously not to excuse the illegality and the damage that these situations cause, both to the people that are tried and convicted as well as the victims. They are, in both cases, complicated situations. Of the dozens of cases that I've seen on internet pornography, internet child pornography, I have yet to see a case where there was a contact component to the evaluation. This is controversial, and a lot of people would argue it, but in my opinion, they are a different class of individuals. In most cases, they fit the characteristics of an addiction to pornography, compulsive use. It often starts out slowly and then advances. But in most cases, if actually in all cases that I've evaluated, I've never seen anybody actually take that to the next level. Now, I will also say that and I have in my history of treating patients, treated a couple of child predators, people who actually have acted out. So the data is mixed on all this, and there's some controversy on it, and I'm not going to go into the data right now, but I will tell you that among people who actually contact and have contact with children, they almost always look at child pornography. But the converse is not necessarily true. If you look at child pornography, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to act out. And in fact, as anecdotally as I was saying, I've never seen that. It does seem to fit more of the characteristic of a sexual or compulsive addiction, and that escalates in its frequency and its intensity. And what happens is they start out often as pornography addicts. In other words, they're looking at pornography online. And the threshold to act out online pornographically is so easy. I mean, all of us have the capacity in our hands to look at incredibly potent sexual images. But what happens is there is a habituation, there is a tachyphylaxis that occurs. There's a certain number of people that will look at these images and they will get bored with them. And then what they do is they start searching for something else that gives them a bigger hit. And often it happens accidentally initially, and then it escalates into desired searches, and they start looking for more and more content, and then it becomes habitual unto itself. In many cases, if not all cases, they know that there's illegality, but they feel compelled and compulsed to continue that behavior. And again, I don't want to, this is such a touchy issue, because even as I'm talking to you, I'm saying, I don't want them to think that I think child pornography is okay. It's not okay. It's not okay that these children have been photographed, and it's not okay that they've been acted on, and it's not okay that child pornography exists. But people who look at it may be different. They may not be in the same class as a contact predator, and they probably should be treated very differently. I have several patients that are either about to go to jail or will be doing jail sentences, and I've seen many who've come out that are in jail, that are going to jail for 3 to 4 years because they looked at these images. I don't know if that serves them, and I don't know that it serves us, because as it was implied earlier in one of the presentations, we're creating this. This comes from us. And all of these patients that I've seen, especially more recently, there's not much difference between me and them. They just had the bad luck to look and become hooked into that process, and then they got caught. So I don't know if that's what you wanted. Is that what you wanted me to say? I don't know.
Well, David's one of our presenters at CATSO trainings, and I invite everyone here to join the CATSO trainings. They're always posted on the website. But he talked about the neuroscience of addiction, and it's the same buzz you get if you're taking a hit of, I don't know, heroin or coke or whatever.
Well, you're using the same pathways in the brain. So, the primary pleasure pathways in the limbic system are designed for 2 reasons. They're designed to make food and sex very appealing. And you're talking about a very primitive structure. These limbic pathways are millions of years old. And those are the pathways that are getting activated by pornography. I have a kid right now, a 13-year-old boy who I'm treating for pornography addiction and sex-to-graphic texting. 13 years old. Now, if the internet didn't exist, I doubt very much I'd be seeing this kid. But the internet creates a platform for access that we've never seen before. And that's what's activating those pathways in the brain. It's natural to be attracted to pornography, but like any pleasurable behavior, when you elevate dopamine, you're going to want more of it, and it's extremely difficult to self-regulate in certain circumstances.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
Is there anything either of you would like to say to Dr. Greenfield about that?
Part of the conversations that Jason and I have had, and with the doctor that he's working with, is that one of the things that Jason really had to do was, to some extent, rewire his brain.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, he was relying on pornography, and he wasn't looking at child pornography, and he wasn't interested in children, but he was reliant on this as his escape and coping mechanism. So the idea of neuroplasticity, I think just a few years ago, or maybe 25 years ago, I don't know the history of it, like the word didn't even exist, and thank goodness it does, because he's able to break away from that cycle. And there's no doubt in my mind that he'll never do that again. because it is treatable, it is curable, it's unfortunate that we've set up society that people can't say, hey, you know what, I think I need some help, and have them get help rather than have them get harmed.
It is treatable, and what does happen with pornography is that you do desensitize, and then you develop what's called reward deficiency. So normal stimulation, both sexual and otherwise, don't really function as well. So you do have to rewire the brain to become resensitized to normal sexual responses. And we also see not only pornography addiction, but problems in sexual behavior, erectile dysfunction. Pornography is it's normal, but it's also an incredibly powerful and potent tool. And when you reduce the threshold for access, it just makes that digital drug that much easier to affect all of us.
A digital drug, that's a good way to put it. Mike, do you want to come and say something? I have one more loved one who would like to make some comments. We have to a quarter of.
I have a friend and business partner who is on the registry, and he has been my friend for 40 years. He's a very close friend, and as such, we've been able to share things from our childhood and bringing up that were remarkably similar and have helped us cope with things in our life. Both of us were in alcoholic households. So, as many in the room will know, when you're a child of an alcoholic, there's certain things associated with that. The biggest one is addictive and compulsive behavior. And we all kind of fall into it to an extent. I was able to talk to my friend. He was convicted of a child pornography, internet conviction, which we'll get to a little bit, but he has helped me in my life because we've been able to share life experiences, and especially where we are in each of our respective families, we are able to help our siblings cope with the issues of being children of alcoholic parents. So one of the things that happened to him when he was a child, he was sexually abused pretty badly by his father. And I don't say that as an excuse for behavior later in his life, but as a reason for gravitating to some of the things that happened to him. I abused drugs pretty badly when I was a teenager, and so did he. I was fortunate to recognize the signs of alcoholism in myself and never fell in that trap. He, unfortunately, did. And he became quite an alcoholic. And what happened to him over time is he had an event in his life that happened. He crashed a car, and so he realized he's got to stop this alcohol. So he worked very hard. He got over his alcohol addiction, and he's now a district manager in AA. So he solved that problem. But unfortunately, what happened to him is he turned in a different direction to satisfy that addiction and compulsive need. And as Dr. Greenfeld says, it fits the same receptors. He was never able to get over that problem, or at least not in time. So what happened to him was he received he got caught for child pornography. And he called his son to tell his son about it because he falls in the same category as Judge Hoffman explained. He's a Caucasian professional. He was a professional man in his community, involved in his community. He had a professional work environment, but he had this internet thing going on. And when he got caught with the pictures, he called his son, who was a college-age son at the time, and his son's response was, "I guess you'll never do that again, will you?" And frankly, that would have been enough to have him never do it again. Having his name in the paper, his position in the community was totally ruined. He was fortunate to have business partners that understood the situation and understood where it came from. Not an excuse, again, but where it came from. But it totally ruined his life in the community. Half his friends would never talk to him again. That would have been enough. But instead he got 5 years in prison for pictures on his computer. He also received a 20-year probation, which means probably the rest of his life at his age. Think about that. So I was very fortunate. I went to approved supervisor training for his probation. I had Dr. James Griffin, who actually, like Dr. Greenfield, was able to explain to me the connection on how that compulsion works in satisfying those needs in people. So it really helped me understand, although I knew ahead of time, but it helped me understand how that is and why that compulsion exists in people. The thing I see now going forward with him being on the registry is something I find hard to understand. The registry has a tendency to isolate people. And one of the big things, one of the big risk factors that I learned in approved supervisor training was you need to have intimate relationships in your life. Well, I'll tell you, the biggest way to cut off people's intimate relationships, put them on the sex offender registry. You're guaranteed they're almost never going to find somebody. So I have a hard time understanding why we would do something like that that would have seemingly the adverse reaction. So that's one of the reasons I'm here today, is I want to help do something about that. I am the chairman of a political town committee. I have relationships with state legislators, state senator. I'm trying to learn ways to present this, because I don't see how incarcerating someone for 5 years, putting my business at risk for 5 years. We had a small business. There was 3 partners working in the business. And I mean, we survived it. But how does that benefit the community? I'm not understanding how that provides a benefit. I think there's a very, very high social cost to non-contact crimes. I don't understand why there's such a reaction to that. I also want to be able to help, if I can, find ways to get people who are not a threat to the community off. And the thing I hope most is it will help my friend find a way to relate and have good relationships for the rest of his life.
Thank you, Mike. You know, I think our time is up, right? Alex, it's 1:45. Okay. I want to thank Mike, David, Jennifer, and Kyle to hear a little bit from the ground up. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.